to the NATO alliance. But within hours of her departure, he signed his most controversial order yet, announcing extreme vetting for immigrants from 7 Muslim-majority countries for at least the next 3 months. He also suspended the US refugee programme. Protests in cities around the world followed, including here in the UK, where a petition opposing Mr. Trump's state visit has attracted more than 1.7 million signatures and will now be debated in Parliament. Yesterday, the Home Secretary Amber Rudd was asked what she thought about the changes to US immigration policy. Let's hear what she had to say.
ISIL and Daesh will use any opportunity they can to make difficulties to create the environment that they want to radicalise people, to bring them over to their side. So it is a propaganda opportunity for them, potentially. The difficulties to the UK over terrorism are not caused by people largely coming from the sort of countries that the US has named, but from people becoming radicalised here. So I would urge our efforts to continue to be on addressing radicalisation here in the UK.
That was the Home Secretary. Andrew Percy, why is a temporary travel ban on people coming from countries that are a haven of terrorist activity, why is that a propaganda opportunity for Islamic State?
Well, I think you've seen from the reaction to this executive order has probably served as a good propaganda tool. But you are quite right to point out it's a temporary ban. And after 3 months, I think the President's already said on his Facebook page, of all things, that they'll start issuing visas again. I don't think that's necessarily come across in some of the coverage.
So why is it a propaganda opportunity? Because Downing Street has said that it's clear that the Islamic State will twist any policy from any government to their own propaganda purposes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely true. I think the concern around this is it's seen as pitching the West against Muslim communities and Muslim countries, and I think that is probably where that fear comes from.
But why this particular, since the government has said almost any policy that any Western government comes out with, and by the way, many governments in the Middle East too, Islamic State will twist that to their purposes. So why pick on the Trump policy?
Well, I think that's absolutely true, and there are many policies for which that can be said. I think this is just another example, as you've seen from the reaction to it. I think that is the fear, that it's seen again as pitching the West, pitching Western democracies against Muslim countries. I think that's what the fear is.
But I mean, it may be seen as that, but that may be because certain people are reporting it in ways that are inaccurate. I mean, it can hardly be a ban on Muslim countries when the 5 most populous Muslim countries in the world are not covered by any of the bans, temporary or permanent.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. That, you know, some of the reporting of it and the suggestion that it is a ban on Muslims is clearly not true. It's a ban on travel from certain countries for a 3-month period. And what I find really annoying about this whole thing is the hypocrisy of it, in that, you know, we have people on the streets against a ban for 3 months, but yet last night we had the Mayor of London hosting dignitaries from 11 countries that have permanent travel bans in place for countries such as Israel. So there's a lot of hypocrisy.
Is it not clear that number 10's statement saying that Islamic State will twist any government policy of any government to their own purposes is number 10 distancing itself from the Home Secretary?
I'm not sure it's that. I think it's probably a statement of fact. That,
what else could it be?
Well, I haven't actually seen the statement in full, but there is no doubt that a whole range of different policies have been twisted by IS, Daesh, but this could be another example of that.
But Andrew, it is exactly that. It's exactly that, because this is seen as and the reason it's seen as a policy that's targeting Muslims is that in those 7 countries, there's also talk of a special dispensation for those who may be religious minorities in those countries. And when one of our closest allies targets Muslims in this way, bans refugees, and you have the Foreign Secretary saying, look, it wouldn't be our policy. And you have the Prime Minister failing to back the Home Secretary when she's stating the bleeding obvious that this is going to feed into ISIS ideology.
Here. This is weak. No, hold on, I've got some questions.
No, I have the general point here, which is I think it's characterised, the reaction has been characterised as weak and mealy-mouthed.
Right, well, that's your view, but let's look at the substance. The 7 countries on the temporary visa suspension list, they're all either terrorist havens or state sponsors of terrorism themselves. They're on a list dating from President Obama in 2015, which he identified as the countries that America was now most at risk from terrorist attack. What is wrong with issuing temporary bans on these countries until you've tested if your visa system is robust enough?
Because I don't think that rationale stacks up. Obama did identify those countries, did tighten up the visa scheme, but simply to ban all refugees in a blanket ban when refugees...
That's a different ban. I'll come on to the refugee ban in a minute.
Then.
So let's continue. Let's talk about this ban with the 7 countries. I'd like you to... Yeah, but you started answering a different one, so I'm going to bring you back to answer the one that I asked, which is the ban on the 7 failed states. They're essentially failed states, these 7 countries. Now, what is wrong until you are sure that your entry system is robust enough having a 90-day ban?
It's not for me to try and explain or defend Trump's policy, which I detest, but why the rationale is flawed is that the terrorist attacks and the title of this executive order was protection against terrorist attacks in the US. The people who have committed the terrorist attacks in the US have overwhelmingly been US citizens or naturalized citizens. They haven't been from these 7 countries. Now, the most objectionable part of this sweeping...
I'm afraid, again, that's not quite true. There has been a terrorist... Ohio State had a terrorist attack from Somalia. The attack in San Bernardino involved people who had come in from outside the country. Now, what is the difference between what Mr. Trump has done and Mr. Obama did when the FBI discovered that using the refugee process, a number of Iraqis had got in who were terrorist threats to the country?
Well, the difference...
He then tightened up that, but he took 6 months to do it, and the number of Iraqi refugees coming in was reduced to a trickle during that time. What's the difference?
First of all, I said the majority of those people perpetrating the attacks in the US have not been from these countries. Secondly, he tightened up the process. He didn't impose a blanket ban. And what is most objectionable... No. What is most objectionable about this is the blanket ban for 120 days on all refugees. Now, this is why this is internationally... causing such trouble is that it breaks not just sort of fundamental values that we try and uphold alongside the United States, but the very conventions that have been in place to take refugees for more than 60 years.
If you are not sure that your vetting procedures are robust enough, and if, as the case with Mr. Obama had, that Iraqis had been using the refugee process to infiltrate terrorists, and there were 2 arrested in Bowling in Kentucky, and their fingerprints have been found on IEDs. If you found that there's not robust enough, why would you not have a temporary ban? I agree that if a lifetime ban, that's entirely different. Why would you not have a temporary ban until a man who was elected saying that he would introduce extreme vetting has a chance to check the system? What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that is it breaches fundamental, established, decades-old conventions about how in this world we treat refugees, and we don't discriminate against those who are some of the most vetted, validated, checked.
It's temporary. He was elected on a platform of improving the vetting procedure. Why does he not can he not take 120 days to do that?
He could do it in a different way. He could do it like Obama. I fundamentally object to it, and the reaction that people have had. I mean, my real criticism of Theresa May, I think she's
weak. Come on, let's stick with the substance of Mr. Trump.
But John, you have a leader who shares platforms with terrorist organisations who he describes as his friends.
I want to stick to the. I want to stick to the terror. I'm looking at the substance of the terrorist ban because I want to come on to the state visit in a minute. It's because hold on.
We're British politicians.
Hold on. I want to ask you this:
what should Britain be doing?
And
what should our British Prime Minister be doing?
I'm sorry, Mr. Healy, it's on the basis of the substance of the Trump policy. It seems that you want the state visit to be banned and not to take place. Now, I want to ask you this on the refugees. At the height of the barrel bombing of women and children in Syria, and of chemical weapons being used against them too in Syria, how many Syrian refugees did President Obama allow in?
Andrew, I have no idea.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you. In 2012,
no idea.
31.
But this...
In 2013, 36. At the height of the obscenity.
None of us in the Western world have a record to be proud of on Syria over the last few years. This is a question about what Britain should do, our Prime Minister should do, and at least Jeremy Corbyn has had the guts to stand up, like more than 1 million people signing this petition, and say this is not acceptable.
All right, well, let's come back to what Britain should do, because I do emphasise it's on the basis of what you think Mr Trump's policy is, that you don't want the state visit to proceed. What is the difference between a state visit from the Chinese president, a totalitarian leader, and a state visit from the president of the United States?
The talk at the moment is postponing, not banning. And
all right. Well,
I think
why that?
An immediate endorsement of an encouragement of the state visit for President Trump is in effect an endorsement of this worldwide ban on refugees and the very selective ban on Muslim majority country migrants.
So, well, actually, it's 7.
So it should be postponed.
So it's just a matter of timing.
And even the Permanent Secretary, recent Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office has said, look, if the state visit goes ahead in these circumstances, it's going to embarrass the Queen. Of course we should be standing up to President Trump on this. So the question is postponement and pressuring
the Queen
in the proper way
President
Trump to change his policy.
The Queen entertained Ceausescu. There's barely not a dictator she's not had to entertain at the bequest of a British government, but she shouldn't, as a matter of timing, entertain the president of our most important ally, a man who, unlike the Chinese president or Mr. Ceausescu, was actually elected. That's your position?
Look, the state visits, the reality of being a country in the modern world means that we have to have good relationships. Now, our special relationship with the United States brings a special responsibility to be willing to speak out, which the Prime Minister hasn't done. Now, on the state visit, the question here is wholehearted endorsement at this stage is in effect a wholehearted endorsement of what he's just announced.
Well, the government's just attacked what it's announced.
So the debate is about postponement, but the action needs to be pressure on the president to rethink what he's just signed into law as an executive order.
Why not postpone? Why the rush? I mean, Mr. Obama's first state visit wasn't until after 2 years. I think the same is true of Mr. Bush. The same was even true of Mr. Reagan. They had not one came for a state visit in their first year. Why not postpone it?
I just find this argument a bit bizarre. Are we saying that every time we don't like the domestic policy of a particular head of government somewhere, we shouldn't invite them to the United Kingdom? And, the important thing to remember here is that, when you invite the head of state of the United States, it is an honour to the entire country. It is about that relationship between the UK and the US, our most important relationship.
So no postponement.
Really important at the moment when we think about what the president has already said in terms of what he wants to do on trade. I think we get into a very dangerous territory if we start saying, because we don't like a particular domestic policy of a democratically elected leader somewhere in the world, well, we won't invite him in September, but maybe he can come in November. The Labour Party's position on this is just ridiculous.
Okay,
it's all about playing to their base.
We've run out of time. We need to get on,
government.
but no doubt this will come up at PMQs and we can return to it after that, Joe.
Yes.